If you're starting out with nothing from complete scratch, you're really aiming to get to 10% ASAP. You've got to actually have a look at the stats and make your expectations a bit more realistic. It's a process. It's not a one-day thing.
That's Jemma Redpath, founder of JAMY Business Support for Surveyors, and Matt Nally, founder of Surveyor. Two leaders who know that sustainable growth in surveying doesn't happen overnight. It takes patience, it takes process, and it takes structure to build something that lasts.
We found that nearly 10% of firms responded within 5 minutes to, it was an email inquiry we made, and 46% responded within an hour.
Matt's research shows how important speed of response is, separating the firms that win work from those that miss out. Jemma reminds every new surveyor that growth isn't instant, it's earned.
You can't just wing it anymore and wake up at 2 a.m. going, I forgot to send that email out. You have to have structure.
And that's the real shift, from effort to efficiency, from reaction to rhythm. I'm Blaxill, and this is The Surveying Shift. Welcome to The Surveying Shift. I'm Blaxill, CEO of Go Report, where we've been helping surveyors embrace digital transformation across the industry. Each episode, we give you the clarity and confidence to adopt the right digital tools, simplify compliance, and stay competitive in a changing industry without sacrificing profitability. Let's jump into today's episode. Starting with a potentially contentious topic in the industry, because I know some people love them, some people hate them. I wanted to kick us off with lead gen sites and how to use them most effectively, when to use them, what to look out for. So, Jemma, kick us off with your observations on lead gen sites.
Lead gen sites are crucial when you're first starting out. Like, there is no way you're going to get business unless you're well known in the industry and you have a background of, obviously, jobs from elsewhere that you've carried over, or referrals. You're not going to get business except from the lead generation sites. That is your main source of that initial pipeline of work. There's different lead source websites that work for different people. Every one of them is slightly different. Some are better known. Some people will look at the lead costs. Others will look at the quality of the leads. There's not necessarily one that is better than another.
Talk to me about quality of leads. How do you, when you're advising your surveyors, kind of discern what quality of leads means for them?
I probably have some preference in terms of where I've seen over the past 2 years that most of the conversions coming for, but there's no one set rule for one that works across the board. So what works for one area, say in South London, will not necessarily work for Yorkshire. There is a lot of trial and error, and I think the biggest mistake surveyors sometimes make is when they first go solo, they will activate every single lead gen website, which also means that they're then being billed twice for the same lead, because a consumer will go onto a website, search, I want my local surveyor, get a price or 5 from obviously different companies, then go straight onto the next website and look for the cheapest, because ultimately lead generation is price. People are after that price. What works for one company will not work for another one. And it is a trial and error.
How do you go about assessing the quality of leads? How do you go about trialing different sites to find out which one's right for you?
For the first and most important part of it is actually contacting these leads. So what a lot of surveyors do when they start out completely alone, which is obviously something a lot of people do, is they will activate all these lead sites, they will get the leads through, and then they will not get any conversion. And the first question is, okay, well, how are you following up on these leads? And a lot of them will say, well, I'm on site. When I go back in the evening, I would give them a call. But by that point in time, a lot of those leads are already booked. Mm-hmm. So really having a system and having a process in place is key. So, for example, we use a lot of Survey Booker because it's a system that allows you to follow up instantly, and then obviously have that pipeline of who you need to call, and obviously you will call them within 40 minutes, because you need to follow that lead up quickly or someone else will snap it. So it's not necessarily the quality of the lead that's bad, it's how you follow it up as well.
Yeah. Just to touch on that, we did a lead response study in 2020. So it was the caveat for that, it was just coming out of COVID. I think the market had been open about 3-4 weeks again. And speed of response is key. So we found that nearly 10% of firms responded within 5 minutes to, it was an email inquiry we made. And 46% responded within an hour. When you're the first person that's speaking to that customer, you're adding the most value. You're the one who's giving them the information about what a level 2, what a level 3 is, what type of things you'll be doing, how the process works. Mm-hmm. As you become the second, third, fourth, fifth person to speak to them, the amount of extra value you can add significantly decreases. Mm-hmm. So beyond really having to sell yourself and show what value you've got versus the other three they've already spoken to. You've got a much harder sell, and possibly someone's keen to go ahead. They've already booked, as Jemma said. Yeah. So that speed of response is massively a key.
If I may, Jemma, I'm not going to throw this one to you because I know the correct answer here will be partner with Jamie and get your business off the ground. If you are a surveyor on your own and you don't have the support of someone like your team, Jemma, what advice would you give Matt in terms of that speed of response? How would you manage that?
I think, well, for starters, you can have a look at what people are doing in your area, and it ties slightly back with what Jemma was saying about different lead sources being better than others in different areas. It depends how you're performing versus others. What how quickly you're responding, what email you're sending out. But I think you need to be looking at what people are doing in your area, and if you're not able to match that, then you're going to struggle. So if you're using a particular lead generation site, let's say to start with, if everyone's responding within 5 minutes with automated emails to get their foot in the door and you're not, you're already at a disadvantage. So you need to then be looking at what process you can put in place, whether it's a system like ours, whether it's another sort of thing you put together that sends some initial content out about when you'll be in touch. Because quite often it's just about setting expectations rather than having to be the first to call. And then if you match that expectation or beat it, then you're on a good first step. So I think that's your first point, is just looking at where do you sit in the market versus others, or where you're going to be sitting. I
might be, and Jemma, you've probably got a good view of this. I might be, actually, I'm sure you do as well, Matt, asking too much, and I'm sure there'll be a range. But if I was starting out and I was running lead gen sites for the first 6 months, how many leads should I expect to get through, and what's a decent conversion rate?
It depends on the time of the year, it depends on the area, and it depends on what postcode you're activating. There really isn't a set. Conversion wise, really, if you're starting out with nothing from complete scratch, you're really aiming to get to 10% ASAP and then building up on that. So, we have a mixture of accounts who, anything between 25 and 60. Our highest one is 60, but it's not a one day thing. So I think a lot of surveyors starting out, we have a bit of a conversation before they start, where obviously they supply me with a lot of information, including price lists or what they would like to achieve, obviously, and areas, etc. And occasionally, obviously, you'll have someone who has, comes with nothing, and their level 2 will start at £800. Now, you're not going to get £800 on your first week, because you have no reviews, you have no history, you have no referrals, and you're competing on a lead generation site where people are price conscious. So obviously you're not going to be the cheapest. No one's asking you to be the cheapest, but equally you've got to actually have a look at the stats and make your expectations a bit more realistic. It's a process. It's not a one day thing. So what someone does in the first 3 months as a workflow, if you may, is different to what you do, 4 to 8 months in. It's a different stage entirely. By the time you get to, 8 months to a year, you should very well be in a position to hire a second person, a second surveyor, and actually grow that second person as well. Not everyone does want to grow to that point where they hire other people, don't get me wrong, and there's no right or wrong with it. We have a mix of surveyors who, everyone assumes that lead generation, that anyone using lead gen just wants to churn out as many surveys as possible, but that is not the case at all. Like, we've got clients who will only do 4 jobs a week because that's all they want to do. They want the work-life balance of their families. You don't have to do, there's no metric that says if you're not bringing in 40 grand a month, you're any work somewhere else.
Yeah.
You might have the person who's chasing the quality time of the family. You might have someone who, has another job on the side. You might have someone who is just money focused. How you actually develop a strategy also depends on what you are trying to achieve as a person. So obviously, there's stages. Whatever you do, there is stages to go through.
Absolutely. I think that's covered off lead gen pretty well. You mentioned it's absolutely essential when you start. And then some people have perhaps a less fond view of lead gen sites, the perception that comes with it. How do you go about weaning yourself off sites? I know we've talked about it in the past, Jemma, referrals being absolutely critical. I'll pass it to Matt, but how do you approach referrals? How do you drive them? How do you make sure that you're getting them in to support your future growth? Yeah,
definitely. I've discussed this with Jemma before, but not every job, but most jobs you're going to be going to collect keys likely from an agent. Okay, sometimes it's direct with the vendor or something else, but a lot of times you're going to be popping into an estate agent's branch or speaking with a conveyancer afterwards when you're going through the report. And these are people you can be then building up relationships with. You're not going to be getting referrals straight away from those people. They don't know who you are first time. They don't know that you're any better than the other 2 surveyors down the road. But obviously, if you're consistent with how you are every time you turn up and the way you deal with people, and we'll come on to more about the ethical debate around referrals later, I'm sure. But, for me, a lot of the time, what drives interest in giving referrals, even from estate agents, who many people would say it's like a turkey waiting for Christmas, where the surveyor gives bad results to a customer in the right way, because every customer's got a different risk tolerance, that keeps the deal moving forward rather than collapsing it. So, yeah, we can talk about those approaches in a moment. The only thing I'd add on to the sort of moving away from the lead gen sites is they can still be a good thing to use alongside quieter periods, where you're not getting as many leads in. In both cases, whether you're going down the referral route or the lead gen route, it's entirely about how you position your value versus other surveyors. And you do see time and time again, it's the same 5-6 generic USPs. We're RICS, we're local, jargon free, traffic light reports, but it's not differentiating, and that ultimately drives that price drop.
And is there a lens through which surveyors can look at differentiating themselves? I mean, obviously there has to be an authenticity to the way that you're putting yourself forward, right? It can't just be different for the sake of being different. But how do you see your customers successfully differentiate themselves from those 6 bullets that most people have on their side?
Yeah, I think it's where they go into a bit more depth about what that actually means in reality. So we're local. So what, the local cafes or the pubs, or does that mean the geology, materials, the build methods, and therefore you're quicker at and more accurate at diagnosing the type of problems that are in that house? So yeah, it's adding the detail to the sort of generic point that makes it more useful. So yeah, extra things like drone surveys can be useful, but again, what does that mean? So it means finally get a better look at the roof, so you're less likely to find an issue with it once you've moved in that we can't otherwise pick up on. So I think it's sometimes just not going far enough with explaining why that's a benefit. So it's a feature list without actually explaining the value behind it.
Hey, here's something I hear a lot. Keeping up with QA, auditing and regulations feels like a full-time job. And indeed, for some of our customers, it is. With Go Report, QA and compliance doesn't have to be complicated. Our smart reporting templates are built around industry standards, and all your notes, photos, and comments are saved on our system so you and anyone else reviewing your report has the full picture. If you want to simplify QA and compliance, click the QR code or see the link in the show notes. Now, back to the episode.
Jemma, I'm assuming you mentioned someone that had a very high conversion rate. You have to obviously mention them by name, but I'm assuming that kind of
referral only
resonate. Oh, really? Okay.
He's actually referral only. Yes, he wasn't when we started out. Obviously, he started out same as every other company that we've launched from scratch, lead generation. But eventually, he covers a specific smaller area that is local to him, and he is a prime example of how you tackle your local market to a T. Like, he has gone around, met all the agents, made the most of every single time he has gone to collect keys. Matt rightly said, you're going to collect keys or you're meeting the vendor at the property. Every single chance you do that, every single time you do that, that's a chance to make a mark. That's a chance for a conversation. One of the biggest problems we've had with some of our clients, I did a post about this a while ago. We're quite picky with the fact that there's 2 rules that everyone has got to follow. Turn up on time, be polite. 3, and issue your reports on time. And those are the 3 biggest things. So if someone doesn't follow these, we don't work with them. And the reason being is for them to move to a referral, you want to have the reviews. You want to have, obviously, show that agent, okay, this is why I'm better. Look at what my client's saying about me. Yes, you're a surveyor. In theory, you could break a sale if you find something, crucial that will make someone pull out. But actually, that's what clients are paying for. And actually, agents will like the fact that they know who it is. They know their working standard. They know they'll do a good job. And, if someone pulls out, there'll be someone else behind the corner. But to be able to actually move to that referral, it is a process. You do have to go out and meet the agents. Every time you collect keys, follow it up. Lovely to meet you this morning. Can we go and grab a coffee at some point in time? It's simple. It's not actually that complex. But a lot of surveyors I find, and I mean, you guys may agree or disagree with me, brilliant surveyors are not necessarily people persons. So every person's different. It's a bit of a, it's not a rule at all. But, some people fall into surveying, because they like order. Their mind functions differently, not necessarily the most social being out there. So really, it's about how you reset that mindset and don't remain shy enough not to ask for a review.
Sometimes people get into surveying for the love of property and love of buildings and love of the process that they get into. Just quickly on that, describe the ripple effect of not kind of delivering reports on time and not, I suppose, adhering to your word, because you mentioned you've got these strict rules, which I think you've got a strike system, right? So you really do.
We have a strike system, and eventually, obviously, the thing is, our job as kind of there, as someone's support, is to ensure the conversion grows, to ensure any slot is filled, be that 4 slots or 8 slots a week, doesn't matter, and to obviously make sure that reviews are coming in and they're coming in as good reviews. That is obviously the key to then upping the conversion. So it kind of all ties into the next step. If you're sending out your report 10 days later than you should have, you can imagine that we're going to be called daily because if someone's on a tight deadline to buy that property, we're going to be called and they're going to be angry. Rightly so as well. The reason we put in this rule was I don't personally believe I can sell something I don't believe in. So if I know that you're going to take 2 weeks plus to issue a report after the deadline's passed, I can't put a consumer in that position. It's just not right. I wouldn't do it to myself. I wouldn't want it done to myself. I wouldn't do it to them. So obviously that's when we kind of cut ties. But as a general rule of thumb is you want to offer the best service you can possibly offer. And that is on all sides, from your customer service to your report writing, to your defect finding, and things have to be out on time. And if you do these things properly, you are likely going to get a very good review at the end of it. And the more reviews, the more you can then highlight these reviews and out in the conversations that you have with potential clients, saying we are the best rated locally, and you can prove it. You're not just, like Matt said earlier, but, you're not just putting, a USP in an email. You can actually say, here's a link, you can have a look for yourself. And that is what makes a difference.
I just say, in addition to that, you're right, you've got to get it out on time. But to get it out on time, you need to really set the expectation as well in the first place. So, yes, a lot of people put it in their T's and C's. It will be out in 5 working days, but people forget what's written in those. So when you've been, you sent the email to say we're going to the appointment on this date, you confirm you've actually been, so people aren't going, is everything on track? And in there you can include the ETA. It's going to be 5 days, and then deliver it in 3 or 4. So you've beaten the expectation. Yeah, I always say you're going to be longer than you are going to be and deliver.
Hang on, it's better to say 6 days and get out in 4 than say 5 and get out in 10. It's just you're going to leave that person upset. Obviously, you can always have a one-off situation where there's a particular defect that needs more investigation. Fine, but obviously you'll probably likely call that client and explain what the problem is and what you need to look into. Or get a second opinion on, but if it becomes a regular thing, then that's a trend and that's a different scenario altogether. And if you start getting in 1-star reviews, it's very difficult.
Your brand, difficult to recover from that. So, I mean, we talked about reviews, right? And fundamentally, there's an element of asking for reviews, making sure that customers are given the best opportunity to give you a review. But a review only is a useful piece of reference point if it's a good review, right? So, Matt, I suppose from your perspective, you mentioned communicating with the customer. What are the key points that a surveyor, particularly one starting out on their own, is trying to build their brand and their business as best they can? What are the key communication points? What are the key things that lead, aside from doing a good job and producing a good report, that lead to a really good customer experience? To work out what that is, you've got to look at every single touch point a customer's going to have with you, from inquiry all the way through to report. And that'll typically look like initial inquiry in terms of asking for a quote and you getting back to them promptly, asking for terms, then being sent out in a timely manner, clear, easy to follow. Then after terms have been signed, a clear, next step expectation, whether that's booking the appointment, please pay, whatever that is, letting you know that the appointment's been booked or tentatively booked, confirming you've been, uploading the report. There's all these touch points. They take time, unless obviously you automate them through systems like ours. But regardless of how you do that, you want to make sure you've got those touch points in place. And that's what keeps the customer engaged and knowing what's going on. The flip side is they're also at the same time dealing with potentially their mortgage lender or mortgage broker, the solicitor. And if you've got 3 different parties that aren't keeping you in the loop, it's just another stress. Whereas at least if the surveyor's going, right, this is happening at this point, it's happened. And setting the expectations is one less stress out of that overall picture, and it just keeps regular touch points. Yeah, really critical. Ultimately, how do you engender the highest response rate when it comes to asking for reviews?
You know what? The best conversion in terms of actually getting a review from how many times you request a review, the best time to ask is on the post survey call. Most surveyors, obviously it's not a set rule, but the vast majority of surveyors, they will obviously have a post survey call with that client to explain the findings in the report. That's kind of part of the, service offering that everyone would, normally give. Asking for a review while you've just explained the whole report to someone and they are clear on the understanding, they've asked any question they need to ask, that is usually the best time in terms of conversion. So if you ask and you send the link straight out, the likelihood is you are going to have a review come in. If you leave it, people just get distracted. It's normal. You move on to the rest of the house buying process and you forget. You might be lucky enough that some do come back, but actually that post-survey conversation, we've always found that is the best time. So there's only so many times we can follow up someone and ask for a review, but if the surveyor does it on the call or just off the back of the call, as simple as an email saying, great talking to you, just to break down, these were the main points. Any questions, please do not hesitate to give me a call. Can I ask you to leave us a review? Here's a link.
Yeah, I completely agree. At that point, the customer they're most happy, they're most motivated. And you've just dealt with them. So as soon as something comes through, they're likely to click on it or much more likely to click on it and fill it in. 6 days later, they'll remember they felt good, but the motivation level's just not there. There's other things going on. So it just doesn't happen. So I completely agree with timing on that.
Maybe a period where the company's slightly more mature and has a bit of a reputation, is established and is accredited on the RICS surveyor. Inevitable avenue to drive additional surveys will be looking at panels. And Jemma, or either of you could fill this question, but let's start with Jemma. How do you go about setting yourself up for success with panels? How do you evaluate which panels you might want to join? How do you make sure that you're positioned attractively for them?
I can only reference non-lending panels because we do not work. None of our clients work with lender panels. So it is only the non-lender panels that we work with a lot. But generally speaking, they will all have a certain criteria. You might have the one who obviously has a different criteria altogether. So it's going through obviously different panels, seeing what you could actually apply to, and then working through the process and seeing what you get back. A good thing to do from the offset really is actually asking each of them, the ones that you would qualify for an estimate of what jobs you might get and what the fees for those jobs would be, because private jobs will always pay better than panel jobs. It is part and parcel. That's not to say that you shouldn't have panel jobs activated at all, because I'm a big believer that you should have a mix of both from a cash flow perspective, but also from a security perspective. When you have gaps, it is a perfect thing to have active. And obviously, you don't have to guarantee a set date. So obviously, if a private job, comes in that takes priority, then it's just going to have to go to the next day. Obviously, as long as it's not yet confirmed with the house buyer. But generally speaking, obviously, private jobs, you tend to get paid before the job. Panel jobs tend to pay a lump sum every month, which for someone starting out is quite handy to have a mix of the two going on. And also just ensures that there's no empty slot. Until all the private jobs are in a position where they overtake the entire calendar, and obviously there is no more capacity. But it definitely does help to try them, to have a good relationship with them, and whenever there's any possibility of activating them, do it.
Explore that relationship. Matt, do you feel similarly towards them? Is that your experience of it?
Yeah, I'd agree with the sentiment. Ultimately, you want a mix of leads coming from different sources. Like anything, you don't want all your eggs in one basket, because if something changes, then you've got no business suddenly. It's the same whether you're on a comparison site and then they change the number of people in the listings, or some much better competitor comes in and suddenly you're not performing, or a referral partner of one agency decides to start referring to somebody else. You've just lost your entire revenue base. So you need a mix. I suppose with the panels, their challenge is when they're quieter, they're going to keep more of the jobs for their own team, so they'll be paneling less out. So you need to be aware of that aspect of it. But when they're busy, it's a nice bread and butter work coming through to keep you busy and have funds through the door. I suppose in terms of getting in front of the panels, there is an element of having to build up your history as a firm. I don't think many will take on a brand new surveying firm that's got no history of having provided a good service, and you're not just sort of 21-star reviews. They want to see a bit of history behind you, and you know what you're doing. and that will come with all the challenges of the right PI cover and all that type of stuff. But yeah, I think overall I agree with Gemma. It's right. It's having a good mix so that as the market changes, you're not reliant on one source.
Matt, you mentioned there, ups and downs from various external factors. One thing that I'd imagine for some of your customers, Gemma, is a concern, albeit you will no doubt help them manage it, is the kind of seasonal ups and downs. Inevitably, the property market has its flow. How do you go about helping? What advice would you give to customers who are thinking about how to smooth their demand across the kind of seasonal period?
Lower expenses as much as possible during the year. Make the most of every single slot you can during the year, because come the December period, for the prime example, things do drop. Unless you're at a stage where you're a complete referral, things just come through the door organically. If you're relying on lead gen or even on panels, everyone will have less work and you will be affected. So take holidays in December. Summer warm in December if you have to. But that's, really, if you're assuming someone is, obviously working for themselves, then you really want to try and get the most in when the work is there, and perhaps on the quieter times, just that's when you take a break.
Yeah, I completely agree. Particularly if you've started to employ, you don't want all your team booked for holiday at the busiest period when you could be maximizing turnover. You want them to be off when the market's down, because you don't need the capacity in the business. So you might as well have that holiday cost when it's not affecting turnover. I think that's the main thing, planning. And also the other one I was going to mention, the make hay while the sun shines fallacy, which I've talked about so many times. There's plenty of people when they start out, and I completely get it, and fall into the trap multiple times, is I've got to maximize the amount of work I do when it's busy and just work all hours of the day. And then I'm going to panic when it's gone quiet and do everything I can to do, just email people and try and convert leads, and not actually building time to stop and rest and work on the business. You've got to have that balance, and just allow for the fact that it's not going to be permanently the same busyness.
We tell everyone when they first, whatever time of the year they're starting, because obviously some will have worked with bigger firms, they know things are going to drop a bit, some might not have. And the first thing we tell everyone, just be aware that in December things do drop a bit, so you need to kind of be prepared for that time of the year. And without failure, come December, my calendar's half what it normally is. Yes, that is exactly what we were talking about. So really, the earlier in the year you start out, the more reviews and things you want to get in. So the example that we were talking about earlier, one of our clients who is the one who does 4 jobs a week, very small area, but it's all referral. He was a prime example of someone who did not have any issues come last Christmas. He was fully booked from the start of December into the middle of January. His waiting list is huge. If anything, he loses jobs because there was no availability. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to get someone in that position. And it's not necessarily going to happen within a year in some areas. Obviously, you have a lot more competition than others. So I think that's kind of what you want to aim towards, but that process can take a long time.
We've talked quite a lot, and actually that's a nice segue. We talked quite a lot about perhaps more junior firms or rather firms that are slightly smaller. And this is an entirely personal decision, as you rightly pointed out, Gemma, in terms of whether you want to grow your business and whether you want to take on that next lead. First of all, what are the symptoms or what are the typical signs that you see when someone's going, actually, we can take on another person, we can expand our business? And when should you have the confidence to do that? Because, as you said, right, you can have a pipeline that's more than full enough for you, but the idea of bringing on a whole another kind of full-time person can be quite daunting. So how have you seen your customers successfully manage that transition?
Whenever ours have gone on to recruit anyone else for their firms, for the vast majority, we have a mix of 1 to 3 man bands, although there is a few exceptions. There is a couple that have gone on to have 5. For the vast majority, it is very much down to a calendar or an area-based decision. So it's common sense. If your calendar is 5-6 weeks ahead at all times, and you're losing jobs because of the lack of availability, then you really might want to think of hiring to bring that down to 2.5 weeks. But you're filling up 2 people's calendars. You're not going to lose the jobs that you were losing. Obviously, you're getting the jobs because you're good at something and people know you're good. It's just availability. So really bring that down by hiring another person. It's a guaranteed no-brainer. It could also be a case that demand, you're covering your patch perfectly fine, but there's demand in the next door area, and you just don't have the capacity to go to that area. So in that case, have a look for someone in that particular area. I think the biggest mistake I've seen people make, and actually we haven't had it for a long time now, I think people are better educated. The very beginning when we first set out, there was companies who joined us who would, open in one area and then decide to hire a surveyor in the other part of the country and expect the same results. Now, you're not, no one, you might very well be your local go-to person for your area, but no one knows you up in, Manchester or somewhere if you're in south of England. You got to start from scratch and your conversion will drop, your costs will rise unless you've pre-planned this, which some don't, many do, but some don't. You're going to end up wondering why it's not working. But, it really is lack of planning and go a completely different area where no one knows who you are. Whereas perhaps going like a couple of areas out of where you're based, that means that A, you're tackling the next door region to yourself, but B, should that person ever be ill, you can probably cover.
Mm-hmm. So that adjacent jump is really important, that expansion into
I would always focus on whatever region someone's in, cover the entire region first, and then look at the neighbouring ones and see where there's demand.
Very good. Matt, I don't know whether you want to add to that, but it also ties into something that obviously is close to both of our hearts and things that we think about on a daily basis in terms of, one answer to I've got a 5-week waiting line and losing business is to go, right, well, we can bring someone on. And that comes with relatively high overheads. I suppose the other thing would look at your own process, look at your own systems, and that you can talk at length about this, but thinking about how you can enable more time for yourself or make sure that you're building more time for you to complete those surveys.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing you can do is put your price up. If you're that far ahead, there's an argument you're potentially too cheap at that point. But I think when you're coming to the point of you're that busy, and or you want to be starting to build a team around you, whether that's more surveyors in terms of more coverage, or whether that's getting an admin team in, admin office assistant, whatever that is, you need to start moving away from the mentality of I do everything in my head and at my email inbox to I need a process and a system. You can't have everyone trying to read what's in your mind and expect everything to run smoothly. So, for example, if you're not available for a bit, who else can look at what's going on the job when someone calls in? How are you tracking who's doing what from a compliance perspective? All these types of things need a system behind them. You can't just wing it anymore and wake up at 2 a.m. going, I forgot to send that email out. I'll put a note for tomorrow morning. You have to have structure. So I think that there's an element of planning. Many do that when they launch and they go, we've got lots of startups with us that go, I know what I want to do. I also know that even if I just want to be on my own, we've got loads of sole practitioners. I don't want that stress of waking up trying to remember if I did something, or trying to find that email in the thread, or remembering what kind of flag to put on it. They need the system.
And we talked about people getting in surveying because they like surveying, right? There's the reality that comes with it is actually there's a whole host of different things that need to.
There's a whole host.
To go with it.
We get this a lot, and don't get me wrong. Like anyone who's ever asked us for a call to inquire about our services, the first thing I tell anyone is you need to get yourself a good system, both for reporting and for your data. Like you cannot work off an Excel. If I ask you what's your conversion per lead source and you can't tell me, that means you don't know what's working and what's not. And that's obviously where the likes of Surveyor comes in. I mean, a push of a button and you can actually break down, as long as it's set up correctly, you can break down where every single bit of business has come from. Equally with a reporting tool. If you're going to do everything on Word, yes, it might work for you and it works for certain people. But if you're going to try and obviously be a one-man, who wants to do everything with or without support externally, you need to try and maximize obviously the time you're spending on certain things, and obviously having to, manually chase up quotes or manually chase up, send terms, upload them to sign up, and also with the reporting itself. So, if you're writing into a Word, that's by default, it's going to take a lot longer than, talking into Go Report.
Yeah. And you would hope you spend more time doing the things you do enjoy doing, right?
That's the thing. That is the whole idea. Yeah, that is the entire idea. You think it's common sense, but we, the amount of people that we talk to, I talk to that have, that use Word or no system. And I say, obviously, something like a business support or an admin person, that obviously is a much higher upfront cost. That could, you might need it. You might decide to do it yourself. Your wife could do it for you. But But systems, the amount of hours you as a firm get back by having those systems in place, priceless.
Yeah, and tying it back to what we've been talking about the whole way through with lead sources and knowing, making sure you're growing and achieving what you want, whether that's maximizing your diary or scaling up. You need to be able to make decisions on what sources are working well for you, and that's not just conversion rate, but like the right average fee, because you can have a great conversion rate, terrible average fee, and vice versa. So you don't want to turn a source off because it's low conversion, if it's getting you triple the fee. But a lot of the time you won't have that information, or it won't be accurate if you've not filled in your spreadsheet correctly and missed things off and not updated it at the right times. And years ago, way before my surveying days, I was an area manager for Lidl, and in the bakery sections, you'd be looking at the stats because everything was data driven. And you'd be like, why are you baking 20 trays of blueberry muffins? Like, everyone loves them. And you're going, well, stats show that people eat about 2 a day. So we're writing loads of stuff and writing it off and throwing it away. So it's easy to have anecdotal evidence in your head of what's working, but very often the stats will be different. And so that's again why a process, not to be our system, but a process around properly tracking information then helps you grow properly.
Having that data, and not just from a switching off perspective, right? But if you know competitors or peers are doing well in a certain area and you're not, it's a really good opportunity to evaluate and say, well, how do we change our process? How do we change what we're doing?
It's also really important to work out, and a lot of people don't do this, to work out the cost of the actual lead acquisition. Because generally, if you're brainstorming with someone, with a surveyor, and you say, okay, well, why don't you join X panel? And they go, oh, the fees are a bit low. And I'm like, okay, but what is your actual cost when you're going off lead generation sites? The conversion might be great, but what's the actual cost? And actually, sometimes you'll find that if you work out the cost, sometimes that panel job, which has no lead cost to it, will have made you more than than a lead generation. You have to know your stats. If you don't know your stats, you're operating blind. You might think something works and it doesn't. Another big thing from a reporting end, actually, is whatever tool someone uses to report with on the property, assuming they're using a software, everyone needs to go through putting in their phrases in. Because if you don't do those phrases, you're going to, have a software. You tick the box of I have a software tick, but you're not getting any quicker because your phrases are not in there and you're having to copy and paste them off in Excel. Yeah. Actually taking the time to build that up and having everything that you would put into a report in there as an option saves so much time when you're inside.
And I think that setup is critical, right? You'll know this, Gemma, in terms of adoption, in terms of getting value from companies like Go Report, making the most of the support team, the onboarding team to go, right, I've got this really strong foundation from which to build is absolutely critical.
But also I think it's crucial for people, if there is something that someone needs that they can't see being provided, speak up, because sometimes that feature might be there and you just won't know about it. And other times, if enough people are requesting something will get put in place eventually. Like I talk from experience with Matt. I mean, I've worked with Matt across years, basically since I started in surveying, across different companies. But take Surveybook, every single time that, and I put things out, I'm that kind of person that goes, I really, really would like to have this because it, and I explain the rationale behind it. But you actually, you a year later or 6 months later, or however long that might be, that is then put in. And actually, we've learned to operate in the exact same system. So from launch to now, we've added in a certain amount of services, like a weekend cover, for example, because we were requested it by our clients. And obviously, if there's a rationale that makes sense, and if it's something that people will need, then absolutely, and it's, I think, don't just assume that because you can't see something, it's not there. Because sometimes it could very well be there as an option. You just don't know about it. And if it isn't, the companies will look at it. That's data that is good for them to be able to build and get better.
Yeah, I was going to say, more often than not, it'll be really useful feedback that you can put into the roadmap, and they'll be delighted to hear it. So absolutely.
Only bit, if we wanted to flesh it out a tiny bit more, it's just the referrals bit, because there's a lot of, particularly at the moment with the home survey standard being out, there's a lot of debate around the ethics of referral fees and referrals, and I can touch on that if that helps.
So talking about referrals, I know they can, referral fees specifically can be contentious, and I think they're referenced explicitly in the new home buyer standards, which are under review at the moment. Matt, I know you've contributed to that and have some thoughts on that side of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate around referral fees, which I get. You want to be transparent with customers if you're going down that route. Obviously, who reports on things like panels, the panel side of fees and who's taking what cuts is different. But yeah, under the new standards, you do need to say whether it's under consultation still, obviously, but you do need to reference whether you have potentially paid a fee or have paid a fee. There are questions around the ethics on referring or referral fees, and I get it in terms of is there a risk that potentially you're going to favour the way you do a report for the agent, so you keep getting more business. My argument is the referral fee makes no difference to that. You're incentivized or not to provide a good service to the agent. If you want to keep getting referrals, the fee is just another byproduct of that process. What you really need to be watching out for is, are you finding yourself slipping into, I'm softening how I present everything through a referrer because I don't want to stop the referrals, or no, I'm still being brutally honest. But when I deliver my feedback to the customer, I'm explaining it through the lens of their risk appetite. So, I might be a buyer that doesn't care if it's all threes. I know I'm going to be stripping it back to the brick and rewiring, replumbing, whatever. I just want to know if the subfloor is going to collapse. Whereas there might be another buyer who just wants to move in. And so you've got to reference what you found in relation to their risk of wanting it to be ones. So I think that's where referrals you need to be careful. Is just in general, are you starting to flip towards trying to keep that relationship going? You're worried about losing that income rather than the fee. I think that the fee is a red herring personally, but I can see how potentially there could be a risk there. But again, if you're doing things in the right way, there isn't. Of course, you don't have to just get referrals through agents. You can get referrals from conveyancers who you talk to after reports about the legal aspects, from brokers. So there are different avenues you can go down around the referral aspect. But personally, I get that there's a contentious aspect on the agency side, but it's just about, I think, how
maintaining that objective is it. Yes.
And
cool. I think as long as the terms, I mean, obviously you've been through the consultation, I haven't, so I'm going to preempt this, but as long as the terms reference that you may be getting a referral fee, that should in theory cover you, obviously assuming you are going to report regardless of referral fee.
I agree. The terms should say that.
And also the referrals, you can also look at obviously past clients, vendors, etc. Like there is others that are not necessarily paid for referrers that you can also utilize. There's around pools of referrers, like you say. Obviously, there's mortgage brokers, all sorts, conveyancers, vendors, previous, friends of previous buyers. It's just about getting in front of the right people and actively putting something in your terms to say there may be a referral paid.
I think that's a large part of the new standards right across the board is transparency and making sure you're being upfront and honest with the customer.
Yeah, completely. I think some of the debate comes around the complexities of where it's, I don't know, referrals come into a panel, the panel firm's giving it out. And so by the time it's got to an end surveyor, they're only getting paid 10% of the fee. But there aren't many situations like that at all. But the standard is obviously trying to make that clearer and how it's reported to customers.
Jemma, Matt, thank you very much for joining me for this episode. Kind of parting thoughts, we're going to gather them with two specific questions. Jemma, because of your experience and your background in helping so many surveyors get off the ground and get started, if you were starting your own surveying practice tomorrow, what are the key takeaways? What are the key things you would do to put the process in place to ensure that they scale and get off to a successful start?
Get a CRM in place. Get yourself a good reporting tool, whichever one you're comfortable with of the systems, but get yourself something where you can track and speed up the process so you're starting correctly from the offset. Always turn up on time. Deliver your reports in time. Over deliver. Promise 7 days, do it in 5. But make sure that you're doing things end to end correctly, and try and get as many good reviews in through the door as soon as you can, because that's the difference between being on a lead generation site for life and having referrals come through and conversion overall.
Great. Thank you very much. And Matt, I'll throw the ball to you in a slightly different context. So a few years down the line, Jemma set up an extremely successful practice, and she's now 5 years in, medium size, brought on other surveyors, but growth has kind of plateaus. What avenues, what strings would you pull to try and ignite that growth again and go to the next level?
Yeah, ultimately, I think it touches on two things we've talked about: it's systems and data. The data is firstly where which sources are working well, which aren't, which are giving the good average fee, conversion rates, etc. The other part is what should be a continual process, not every day, but I don't know, quarterly, biannual, where you're looking at what processes in your business are working really well and which ones are the bottlenecks. Those bottlenecks that are taking up the time or causing frustrations for your team, your customers, they're the ones you need to iron out. And then it's looking at what you need to put in place to resolve that. Very often it's, because we speak to firms coming off manual processes, they, cash on a spreadsheet about what's going on, someone's off, the email's stuck in an inbox. It's looking at all those types of process about where a business is getting stuck, and deciding what route you need to go down to streamline it. And that's not just a one-off step, it's a continual review. And that's the main thing for me.
I would also suggest everyone looks into what optional extras they may be able to add to that phase inspection. So whether it's a level 2 or level 3 survey, mostly with level 3s, you would be able to perhaps offer a drone. You might be able to offer a thermal imaging report. You might be able to offer costings for the issues found. If you can, that all of a sudden takes your, call it £500 job to £700 for the same exact amount of time. I mean, there's very little difference, obviously, with, adding something when you're already on site. You're not having to go to another property. So really, it's about trying to maximize what you can get out of each visit. And relatively small things like this do help an awful lot.
And maximise the value to the customer, right? Mm-hmm. That's ultimately providing a better.
Yeah. That's a given. That's always a given. The client always has to get the maximum out of it.
Well, thank you very much both for joining us. It was a really interesting conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having some.
If you enjoyed today's episode or it gave you some food for thought, be sure to follow our show on your preferred podcast platform. To learn more about what we do at Go Report, visit goreport.com. The links are also in the bio. Until next time.